Scotland is a country that is part of the United Kingdom. It contains nearly one-third of the United Kingdom's land area, consisting of the northern part of the island of Great Britain and more than 790 adjacent islands, principally in the archipelagos of the Hebrides and the Northern Isles. To the southeast, Scotland has its only land border, which is 96 miles 154 kilometers long and shared with England. The country is surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean to the north and west, the North Sea to the northeast and east, and the Irish Sea to the south. The population in 2022 was 5,439,842. Edinburgh is the capital and Glasgow is the most populous of the cities of Scotland. The Kingdom of Scotland emerged as an independent sovereign state in the 9th century. In 1603, James VI succeeded to the thrones of England and Ireland, forming a personal union of the three kingdoms. On the 1st of May, 1707, Scotland and England combined to create the new Kingdom of Great Britain, with the Parliament of Scotland subsumed into the Parliament of Great Britain. In 1999, a Scottish Parliament was re-established, and has devolved authority over many areas of domestic policy. The country has its own distinct legal system, education system and religious history, which have all contributed to the continuation of Scottish culture and national identity. Scottish English and Scots are the most widely spoken languages in the country, existing on a dialect continuum with each other. Scottish Gaelic speakers can be found all over Scotland, however the language is largely spoken natively by communities within the Hebrides. The number of Gaelic speakers numbers less than 2% of the total population, though state-sponsored revitalisation attempts have led to a growing community of second language speakers. The mainland of Scotland is broadly divided into three regions: the Highlands, a mountainous region in the north and northwest, the Lowlands, a flatter plain across the centre of the country, and the Southern Uplands, a hilly region along the southern border. The Highlands are the most mountainous region of the British Isles and contain its highest peak, Ben Nevis, at 1,345 metres. The region also contains many lakes, called lochs. The term is also applied to the many saltwater inlets along the country's deeply indented western coastline. The geography of the many islands is varied. Some, such as Mull and Skye, are noted for their mountainous terrain, while the likes of Tiree and Coll are much flatter. The mainland of Scotland comprises the northern third of the land mass of the island of Great Britain, which lies off the northwest coast of continental Europe. The total area is 80,231 kilometers square, with a land area of 77,901 kilometers square, comparable to the size of the Czech Republic. Scotland's only land border is with England, and runs for 154 kilometers between the basin of the River Tweed on the east coast and the Solway Firth in the west. The Atlantic Ocean borders the west coast and the North Sea is to the east. The island of Ireland lies only 21 kilometers from the southwestern peninsula of Kintyre. Norway is 305 kilometers to the northeast and the Faroe Islands, 70 kilometers to the north. The territorial extent of Scotland is generally that established by the 1237 Treaty of York between Scotland and the Kingdom of England and the 1266 Treaty of Perth between Scotland and Norway. Important exceptions include the Isle of Man, which, having been lost to England in the 14th century, is now a crown dependency outside of the United Kingdom. The island groups Orkney and Shetland, which were acquired from Norway in 1472, and Berwick-upon-Tweed, lost to England in 1482. The geographical centre of Scotland lies a few miles from the village of Newton Moor in Badenoch. Rising to 345 metres above sea level, Scotland's highest point is the summit of Ben Nevis, in Lochaber, while Scotland's longest river, the River Tay, flows for a distance of 188 kilometres. The whole of Scotland was covered by ice sheets during the Pleistocene ice ages, and the landscape is much affected by glaciation. From a geological perspective, the country has three main subdivisions: the Highlands and Islands, the Central Lowlands, and the Southern Uplands. The Highlands and Islands lie to the north and west of the Highland Boundary Fault, which runs from Arran to Stonehaven. This part of Scotland largely comprises ancient rocks from the Cambrian and Precambrian, which were uplifted during the later Caledonian orogeny. It is interspersed with igneous intrusions of a more recent age, remnants of which formed mountain massifs such as the Cairngorms and Skye Quillins. 111, in northeastern mainland Scotland, weathering of rock that occurred before the last ice age has shaped much of the landscape. The climate of most of Scotland is temperate and oceanic, and tends to be very changeable. As it is warmed by the Gulf Stream from the Atlantic, it has much milder winters, but cooler, wetter summers, than areas on similar latitudes, such as Labrador, southern Scandinavia, the Moscow region in Russia, and the Kamchatka Peninsula on the opposite side of Eurasia. Temperatures are generally lower than in the rest of the UK, with the temperature of -27.2 degrees Celsius recorded at Braemar in the Grampian Mountains on the 11th of February, 1895, the coldest ever recorded anywhere in the UK. Winter maxima average 6 degrees Celsius in the lowlands, with summer maxima averaging 18 degrees Celsius. The highest temperature recorded was 35.1 degrees Celsius at Flores Castle, Scottish Borders on the 19th of July, 2022. The west of Scotland is usually warmer than the east, owing to the influence of Atlantic Ocean currents and the colder surface temperatures of the North Sea. Tiree, in the Inner Hebrides, is one of the sunniest places in the country. It had more than 300 hours of sunshine in May 1975. Rainfall varies widely across Scotland. The Western Highlands of Scotland are the wettest, with annual rainfall in a few places exceeding 3,000 millimetres. In comparison, much of lowland Scotland receives less than 800 millimetres annually. Heavy snowfall is not common in the lowlands, but becomes more common with altitude. Braemar has an average of 59 snow days per year, while many coastal areas average fewer than 10 days of lying snow per year. Scotland's wildlife is typical of the northwest of Europe, although several of the larger mammals such as the lynx, brown bear, wolf, elk and walrus were hunted to extinction in historic times. There are important populations of seals and internationally significant nesting grounds for a variety of seabirds such as gannets. The golden eagle is something of a national icon. On the high mountain tops, species including ptarmigan, mountain hare and stoat can be seen in their white color phase during winter months. Remnants of the native Scots pine forest exist, and within these areas the Scottish crossbill, the UK's only endemic bird species and vertebrate, can be found alongside capercaillie, Scottish wildcat, red squirrel and pine marten. Various animals have been reintroduced, including the white-tailed eagle in 1975, the red kite in the 1980s, and there have been experimental projects involving the beaver and wild boar. Today, much of the remaining native Caledonian forest lies within the Cairngorms National Park, and remnants of the forest remain at 84 locations across Scotland. On the west coast, remnants of ancient Celtic rainforest remain, particularly on the Tainish Peninsula in Argyll. These forests are particularly rare due to high rates of deforestation throughout Scottish history. The flora of the country is varied, incorporating both deciduous and coniferous woodland as well as moorland and tundra species. Large-scale commercial tree planting and management of upland moorland habitat for the grazing of sheep and field sport activities like deer stalking and driven grouse shooting impacts the distribution of indigenous plants and animals. The UK's tallest tree is a grand fir planted beside Loch Fyne, Argyll in the 1870s, and the Fortingall yew may be 5,000 years old and is probably the oldest living thing in Europe. Although the number of native vascular plants is low by world standards, Scotland's substantial bryophyte flora is of global importance. During the 1820s, many Scots migrated from Scotland to countries such as Australia, the United States and Canada, principally from the Highlands, which remained poor in comparison to elsewhere in Scotland. The Highlands was the only part of mainland Britain with a recurrent famine. A small range of products were exported from the region, which had negligible industrial production and a continued population growth that tested the subsistence agriculture. These problems, and the desire to improve agriculture and profits, were the driving forces of the ongoing Highland clearances, in which many of the population of the Highlands suffered eviction as lands were enclosed, principally so that they could be used for sheep farming. The first phase of the clearances followed patterns of agricultural change throughout Britain. The second phase was driven by overpopulation, the Highland potato famine and the collapse of industries that had relied on the wartime economy of the Napoleonic Wars. The population of Scotland grew steadily in the 19th century, from 1,608,000 in the census of 1801 to 2,889,000 in 1851 and 4,472,000 in 1901. Even with the development of industry, there were not enough good jobs. As a result, during the period 1841 to 1931, About 2 million Scots migrated to North America and Australia, and another 750,000 Scots relocated to England. Caused by the advent of refrigeration and imports of lamb, mutton, and wool from overseas, the 1870s brought with them a collapse of sheep prices and an abrupt halt in the previous sheep farming boom. In August 2012, the Scottish population reached an all-time high of 5.25 million people. The reasons given were that, in Scotland, births were outnumbering the number of deaths, and immigrants were moving to Scotland from overseas. In 2011, 43,700 people moved from Wales, Northern Ireland, or England to live in Scotland. The most recent census in Scotland was conducted by the Scottish Government and the National Records of Scotland in March 2022. The population of Scotland at the 2022 census was 5,436,600, the highest ever, beating the previous record of 5,295,400 at the 2011 census. It was 5,062,011 at the 2001 census. An ONS estimate for mid-2021 was 5,480,000. In the 2011 census, 62% of Scotland's population stated their national identity as Scottish only, 18% as Scottish and British, 8% as British only, and 4% chose other identity only. Throughout its history, Scotland has long had a tradition of migration from Scotland and immigration into Scotland. In 2021, the Scottish Government released figures showing that an estimated 41,000 people had immigrated from other international countries into Scotland, while an average of 22,100 people had migrated from Scotland. Scottish Government data from 2002 shows that by 2021, there had been a sharp increase in immigration to Scotland, with 2002 estimates standing at 27,800 immigrants. While immigration had increased from 2002, migration from Scotland had dropped, with 2002 estimates standing at 26,200 people migrating from Scotland. Although Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, the largest city is Glasgow, which has just over 584,000 inhabitants. The Greater Glasgow conurbation, with a population of almost 1.2 million, is home to nearly a quarter of Scotland's population. The Central Belt is where most of the main towns and cities of Scotland are located, including Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, and Perth. Scotland's only major city outside the Central Belt is Aberdeen. The Scottish Lowlands host 80% of the total population, where the Central Belt accounts for 3.5 million people. In general, only the more accessible and larger islands remain inhabited. Currently, fewer than 90 remain inhabited. The southern uplands is essentially rural and dominated by agriculture and forestry. Because of housing problems in Glasgow and Edinburgh, 5 new towns were designated between 1947 and 1966. They are East Kilbride, Glenrothes, Cumbernauld, Livingston, and Irvine. The largest council area by population is Glasgow City, with Highland being the largest in terms of geographical area. Scotland has 3 indigenous languages: English, Scots, and Scottish Gaelic. Scottish Standard English, a variety of English as spoken in Scotland, is at one end of a bipolar linguistic continuum, with Broad Scots at the other. Scottish Standard English may have been influenced to varying degrees by Scots. Highland English is spoken in that region, while Gaelic is mostly spoken in the Western Isles, where it continues to be used by a large proportion of residents. Immigration since World War II has given Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Dundee small South Asian communities. In 2011, there were an estimated 49,000 ethnically Pakistani people living in Scotland, making them the largest non-white ethnic group. The 2004 enlargement of the European Union spurred an increase in migration from Central and Eastern Europe to Scotland, and the 2011 census indicated that 61,000 Poles lived there. There are many more people with Scottish ancestry living abroad than the total population of Scotland. In the 2000 census, 9.2 million Americans self-reported some degree of Scottish descent. Ulster's Protestant population is mainly of lowland Scottish descent, and it is estimated that there are more than 27 million descendants of the Scots-Irish migration now living in the US. In Canada, the Scottish-Canadian community accounts for 4.7 million people. About 20% of the original European settler population of New Zealand came from Scotland. As per 2022 census, a majority of Scots, 51.12%, reported not following any religion. The most practiced religion is Christianity, 38.79%, mostly Church of Scotland, 20.36%, and Roman Catholicism, 13.3%. In almost every council area, the most common response to the census question was no religion except in Nah Shire and Inverclyde, where Church of Scotland, 35.3%, and Catholicism, 33.4%, were the most common responses, respectively. Forms of Christianity have dominated religious life in what is now Scotland for more than 1,400 years. Since Scottish Reformation of 1560, the National Church, Church of Scotland also known as the Kirk, has been Protestant in orientation and Reformed in theology. Since 1689, it has a Presbyterian system of church government independent from the state. Its membership dropped just below 300,000 in 2020, 5% of the total population. The church operates a territorial parish structure, with every community in Scotland having a local congregation. Scotland also has a significant Roman Catholic population, with 13.3% professing that faith, particularly in Greater Glasgow and the Northwest. After the Reformation, Roman Catholicism in Scotland continued in the Highlands and some Western Islands like Uist and Barra, and it was strengthened during the 19th century by immigration from Ireland. Other Christian denominations in Scotland include the Free Church of Scotland and various other Presbyterian offshoots. Scotland's third largest church is the Scottish Episcopal Church. Other minority faiths include Islam, 2.2%, Hinduism, 0.55%, Sikhism and Buddhism. The Sami Ling Monastery near Esk de Lemiwa, which celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2007, is the oldest Buddhist monastery in Western Europe. The Scottish education system has always had a characteristic emphasis on a broad education. In the 15th century, the humanist emphasis on education culminated with the passing of Education Act 1496, which decreed that all sons of barons and freeholders of substance should attend grammar schools to learn perfect Latin, resulting in an increase in literacy among male and wealthy elite. In the Reformation, the 1561 Book of Discipline set out a plan for a school in every parish, but this proved financially impossible. In 1616, an act in Privy Council commanded every parish to establish a school. By the late 17th century, there was a largely complete network of parish schools in the lowlands, but in the Highlands basic education was still lacking in many areas. Education remained a matter for the church rather than the state until the Education, Scotland, Act 1872. Scotland's national school curriculum presently provides the curricular framework for children and young people from age 3 to 18. All 3 and 4 years old children in Scotland are entitled to a free nursery place. Formal primary education begins at approximately 5 years old and lasts for 7 years. Children in Scotland study national qualifications of the curriculum for excellence between the ages of 14 and 18. The school leaving age is 16, after which students may choose to remain at school and study further qualifications. A small number of students at certain private schools may follow the English system and study towards GCSE and A and AS levels instead. There are 15 Scottish universities, some of which are among the oldest in the world. The 4 universities founded before the end of the 16th century are University of St Andrews, University of Glasgow, University of Aberdeen and University of Edinburgh, are collectively known as the Ancient Universities of Scotland, all of which rank among the 200 best universities in the world in the THE rankings, with Edinburgh placing in the top 50. Scotland had more universities per capita in QS World University Rankings Top 100 in 2012 than any other nation. The country produces 1% of the world's published research, with less than 0.1% of the world's population, and higher education institutions account for 9% of Scotland's service sector exports. Scotland's university courts are the only bodies in Scotland authorised to award degrees. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, a constitutional monarchy whose current sovereign is Charles III. The monarchy uses a variety of styles, titles, and other symbols specific to Scotland, most of which originated in the pre-Union Kingdom of Scotland. These include the Royal Standard of Scotland, the Royal Coat of Arms, and the title Duke of Rothesay, which is traditionally given to the heir apparent. There are also distinct Scottish officers of state and officers of the Crown, and the Order of the Thistle, a chivalric order, is specific to the country. The Parliament of the United Kingdom and the Parliament of Scotland are the country's primary legislative bodies. The UK Parliament is sovereign and therefore has supremacy over the Scottish Parliament, but generally restricts itself to legislating over reserved matters, primarily taxes, social security, defence, international relations, and broadcasting. There is a convention the UK Parliament will not legislate over devolved matters without the Scottish Parliament's consent. Scotland is represented in the House of Commons, the lower chamber of the UK Parliament, by 57 members of Parliament, out of a total of 650. They are elected to single-member constituencies under the first-past-the-post system of voting. The Scotland Office represents the British government in Scotland and represents Scottish interests within the government. The Scotland Office is led by the Secretary of State for Scotland, who sits in the Cabinet of the United Kingdom. The Labour MP Ian Murray has held the position since July 2024. As leader of the Scottish Government, the First Minister is a member of the Heads of Government Council and the Council of the Nations and Regions, the bodies which facilitate intergovernmental relations between the Scottish Government, UK Government, Welsh Government, and Northern Ireland Executive. Foreign policy is a reserved matter and primarily the responsibility of the Foreign Office, a department of the UK Government. Nevertheless, the Scottish Government may promote Scottish interests abroad and encourage foreign investment in Scotland. The First Minister and the Constitution Secretary have portfolios which include foreign affairs. As one of the countries of the United Kingdom, the British Armed Forces are the Armed Forces of Scotland. Of the money spent on UK defence, about £3.3 billion can be attributed to Scotland as of 2018 to 2019. Scotland had a long military tradition predating the Treaty of Union with England. Following the Treaty of Union in 1707, the Scots Army and Royal Scots Navy merged with their English counterparts to form the Royal Navy and the British Army, which together form part of the British Armed Forces. The Atholl Highlanders, Europe's only remaining legal private army, did not join the Scots Army or Royal Scots Navy in merging with English Armed Forces, remaining a private army not under the command of the British Armed Forces. Because of their topography and perceived remoteness, parts of Scotland have housed many sensitive defence establishments. Between 1960 and 1991, the Holy Loch was a base for the US fleet of Paul Arry's ballistic missile submarines. Today, His Majesty's Naval Base Clyde, 40 kilometers northwest of Glasgow, is the base for the 4 Trident-armed Vanguard-class ballistic missile submarines that comprise the Britain's nuclear deterrent. Scotland's Scapa Flow was the main base for the Royal Navy in the 20th century. As the Cold War intensified in 1961, the United States deployed Paul Arry's ballistic missiles and submarines in the Firth of Clyde's Holy Loch. Public protests from CND campaigners proved futile. The Royal Navy successfully convinced the government to allow the base because it wanted its own Paul Arry's submarines, and it obtained them in 1963. The RN's nuclear submarine base opened with 4 Resolution-class Paul Arry's submarines at the expanded Farslane Naval Base on the Gare Loch. The first patrol of a Trident-armed submarine occurred in 1994, although the US base was closed at the end of the Cold War. A single frontline Royal Air Force base is located in Scotland. RAF Lossiemouth, located in Moray, is the most northerly air defence fighter base in the United Kingdom and is home to 4 Eurofighter Typhoon combat aircraft squadrons, 3 Poseidon MRA-1 squadrons, and a full-time, permanently based RAF Regiment squadron. Scotland has a Western-style open mixed economy closely linked with the rest of the UK and the wider world. Scotland is one of the leading financial centres in Europe, and is the largest financial centre in the United Kingdom outside of London. Edinburgh is the financial services centre of Scotland, with many large finance firms based there, including Lloyds Banking Group, the Bank of Scotland, the government-owned Royal Bank of Scotland and Standard Life. Edinburgh was ranked 15th in the list of world financial centres in 2007 but fell to 37th in 2012, following damage to its reputation, and in 2016 was ranked 56th out of 86. Its rank had returned to 17th by 2020. Historically, Scottish economy dominated by heavy industry underpinned by shipbuilding in Glasgow, coal mining and steel industries. Petroleum-related industries associated with the extraction of North Sea oil have been important employers since the 1970s, especially in the northeast of Scotland. Deindustrialisation during the 1970s and 1980s saw a shift from a manufacturing focus towards a more service-oriented economy. The Scottish National Investment Bank was established in 2020 by the Scottish Government, which uses public money to fund commercial projects across Scotland in the hope that this seed capital will encourage further private investment to help develop fairer, more sustainable economy. £2 billion of taxpayers' money was earmarked for the bank. Although Bank of England is the central bank for UK, 3 Scottish clearing banks issue sterling banknotes. They are Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland and Clydesdale Bank. The issuing of banknotes by retail banks in Scotland is subject to Banking Act 2009, which repealed all earlier legislation under which banknote issuance was regulated, and the Scottish and Northern Ireland Banknote Regulations 2009. Scotland has 5 international airports operating scheduled services to Europe, North America and Asia, as well as domestic services to England, Northern Ireland and Wales and within Scotland. Highlands and Islands Airports operates 11 airports across the Highlands, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles, which are primarily used for short-distance, public service operations, although Inverness Airport has a number of scheduled flights to destinations across the UK and mainland Europe. 339, Edinburgh Airport is currently Scotland's busiest airport, handling over 13 million passengers in 2017. It is also the UK's 6th busiest airport. The airline Loganair has its headquarters at Glasgow Airport and markets itself as Scotland's airline. Network Rail owns and operates the fixed infrastructure assets of the railway system in Scotland, while the Scottish Government retains overall responsibility for rail strategy and funding in Scotland. Scotland's rail network has 359 railway stations and around 2,760 kilometres of track. In 2018-19, there were 102 million passenger journeys on Scottish railways. On the 1st of January, 2006, Transport Scotland was established, which would oversee the regulation of railways in Scotland and administer major rail projects. Since April 2022, Transport Scotland has taken ScotRail back into public ownership via its operator of last resort, Scottish Rail Holdings. It did the same with the Caledonian Sleeper service in June 2023. The Glasgow subway is the only underground system in Scotland. It opened on the 14th of December, 1896, making it the 3rd oldest underground network in the world after the Budapest Metro and the London Underground. It is owned and operated by Strathclyde Partnership for Transport. The Scottish motorways and major trunk roads are managed by Transport Scotland. The remainder of the road network is managed by the Scottish local authorities in each of their areas. Regular ferry services operate between the Scottish mainland and outlying islands. Ferries serving both the Inner and Outer Hebrides are principally operated by the state-owned enterprise Caledonian MacBrain. Services to the Northern Isles are operated by Serco. Other routes, such as Southwest Scotland to Northern Ireland, are served by multiple companies. DFDS Seaways operated a freight-only Rosyth, Zeebrugge ferry service, until a fire damaged the vessel DFDS were using. A passenger service was also operated between 2002 and 2010. Scotland's sources of energy are provided through renewable energy, 61.8%, nuclear, 25.7%, and fossil fuel generation, 10.9%. Whiteley Wind Farm is the largest onshore wind farm in the United Kingdom, and was Europe's largest onshore wind farm for some time. Tidal power is an emerging source of energy in Scotland. The Maygen tidal stream energy plant in the north of the country is claimed to be the largest tidal stream energy project in the world. In Scotland, 98.6% of all electricity used was from renewable sources. This is minus net exports. Between October 2021 and September 2022, 63.1% of all electricity generated in Scotland was from renewable sources, 83.6% was classed as low carbon and 14.5% was from fossil fuels. Scotland's inventions and discoveries are said to have revolutionized human technology and have played a major role in the creation of the modern world. Such inventions, the television, telephone, refrigerators, MRI scanner, flushing toilets, and steam engine are possible by Scotland's universities and parish schools, together with the commitment Scots had to education during the Scottish Enlightenment. Alexander Fleming is responsible for the discovery of world's first broadly effective antibiotic substance, which he named penicillin, earning him a Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1945. Modern Scottish inventions, the Falkirk Wheel and Glasgow Tower, hold world records for being the only rotating boat lift and the tallest fully rotating freestanding structure in the world respectively. Scotland's space industry is a world leader in sustainable space technology, and according to UK Space Agency, there are 173 space companies currently operating in Scotland as of May 2021. These include spacecraft manufacturers, launch providers, downstream data analyzers and research organisations. The space industry in Scotland is projected to generate £2 billion in income for Scotland's space cluster by 2030. Scottish space industry jobs represent almost 1 in 5 of all UK space industry employment. In addition to its space industry, Scotland is home to 2 planned spaceports, Sutherland Spaceport and Saxavord Spaceport, with launch vehicles such as the Orbex Prime from Scottish-based aerospace company Orbex expected to be launched from Sutherland. Scottish music is a significant aspect of the nation's culture, with both traditional and modern influences. A famous traditional Scottish instrument is the Great Highland Bagpipe, a woodwind reed instrument consisting of 3 drones and a melody pipe called the chanter, which are fed continuously by a reservoir of air in a bag. The popularity of pipe bands featuring bagpipes, various types of snares and drums, and showcasing Scottish traditional dress and music has spread throughout the world. Bagpipes are featured in holiday celebrations, parades, weddings, and other events internationally. Many military regiments have a pipe band of their own. In addition to the Great Highland pipes, several smaller, somewhat quieter bellows-blown varieties of bagpipe are played in Scotland, including the small pipes and the border pipes. As one of the Celtic nations, Scotland and Scottish culture are represented at inter-Celtic events at home and over the world. Scotland hosts several music festivals including Celtic Connections, Glasgow, and the Hebridean Celtic Festival, Stornoway. Festivals celebrating Celtic culture, such as Festival Inter-Celtic de Lorien, Brittany, the Pan-Celtic Festival, Ireland, and the National Celtic Festival, Portarlington, Australia, feature elements of Scottish culture such as language, music, and dance. Scottish cuisine has distinctive attributes and recipes of its own, but shares much with wider British and European cuisine as a result of local and foreign influences, both ancient and modern. Traditional Scottish dishes exist alongside international foodstuffs brought about by migration. Scotland's natural larder of game, dairy products, fish, fruit, and vegetables is the chief factor in traditional Scots cooking, with a high reliance on simplicity and a lack of spices from abroad, as these were historically rare and expensive. Irn-Bru is the most common Scottish carbonated soft drink, often described as Scotland's other national drink, after whiskey. 420. During the late Middle Ages and early modern era, French cuisine played a role in Scottish cookery due to cultural exchanges brought about by the Old Alliance, especially during the reign of Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, on her return to Scotland, brought an entourage of French staff who are considered responsible for revolutionising Scots cooking and for some of Scotland's unique food terminology. Repeated glaciations, which covered the entire land mass of modern Scotland, destroyed any traces of human habitation that may have existed before the Mesolithic period. It is believed the first post-glacial groups of hunter-gatherers arrived in Scotland around 12,800 years ago, as the ice sheet retreated after the last glaciation. At the time, Scotland was covered in forests, had more bogland, and the main form of transport was by water. These settlers began building the first known permanent houses on Scottish soil around 9,500 years ago, and the first villages around 6,000 years ago. The well-preserved village of Skara Brae on the mainland of Orkney dates from this period. Neolithic habitation, burial, and ritual sites are particularly common and well preserved in the Northern Isles and Western Isles, where a lack of trees led to most structures being built of local stone. Evidence of sophisticated pre-Christian belief systems is demonstrated by sites such as the Callanish stones on Lewis and the Mars Howe on Orkney, which were built in the 3rd millennium BC 38. Beginning in the 6th century, The area that is now Scotland was divided into 3 areas. Pictland, a patchwork of small lordships in central Scotland, Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Northumbria which had conquered southeastern Scotland, Dalriata which included territory in western Scotland and Northern Ireland, and spread Gaelic language and culture into Scotland. These societies were based on the family unit and had sharp divisions in wealth, although the vast majority were poor and worked full-time in subsistence agriculture. The Picts kept slaves, mostly captured in war through the 9th century. Gaelic influence over Pictland and Northumbria was facilitated by large number of Gaelic-speaking clerics working as missionaries. Operating in the 6th century on the island of Iona, Saint Columba was one of the earliest and best-known missionaries. The Vikings began to raid Scotland in the 8th century. Although the raiders sought slaves and luxury items, their main motivation was to acquire land. The oldest Norse settlements were in northwest Scotland, but they eventually conquered many areas along the coast. Old Norse entirely displaced Pictish in the Northern Isles. In the 9th century, the Norse threat allowed a Gael named Kenneth I to seize power over Pictland, establishing a royal dynasty to which the modern monarchs trace their lineage, and marking the beginning of the end of Pictish culture. The kingdom of Synod and his descendants, called Alba, was Gaelic in character but existed on the same area as Pictland. By the end of the 10th century, the Pictish language went extinct as its speakers shifted to Gaelic. From a base in eastern Scotland north of the River Forth and south of the River Spey, the kingdom expanded first southwards, into the former Northumbrian lands, and northwards into Moray. Around the turn of the millennium, there was a centralization in agricultural lands and the first towns began to be established. In the 12th and 13th centuries, much of Scotland was under the control of a single ruler. Initially, Gaelic culture predominated, but immigrants from France, England, and Flanders steadily created a more diverse society, with the Gaelic language starting to be replaced by Scots, and a modern nation-state emerged from this. At the end of this period, war against England started the growth of a Scottish national consciousness. David I, 1124–1153, and his successors centralised royal power and united mainland Scotland, capturing regions such as Moray, Galloway, and Caithness, although he could not extend his power over the Hebrides, which had been ruled by various Scottish clans following the death of Sumald in 1164. In 1266, Scotland fought the short but consequential Scottish-Norwegian War which saw the reclamation of the Hebrides after the strong defeat of King Haakon IV and his forces at the Battle of Largs. Up until that point, the Hebrides had been under Norwegian Viking control for roughly 400 years and had developed a distinctive Norse Gaelic culture that saw many Old Norse loanwords enter the Scottish Gaelic spoken by islanders, and through successive generations the Norse would become almost completely assimilated into Gaelic culture and the Scottish clan system. After the conflict, Scotland had to affirm Norwegian sovereignty of the Northern Isles, but they were later integrated into Scotland in the 15th century. Scandinavian culture in the form of the Norn language survived for a lot longer than in the Hebrides, and would strongly influence the local Scots dialect on Shetland and Orkney. Later, a system of feudalism was consolidated, with both Anglo-Norman incomers and native Gaelic chieftains being granted land in exchange for serving the king. The relationship with England was complex during this period. Scottish kings tried several times, sometimes with success, to exploit English political turmoil, followed by the longest period of peace between Scotland and England in the medieval period, from 1217 to 1296. Scotland played a major role in the British effort in the First World War. It especially provided manpower, ships, machinery, fish, and money. With a population of 4.8 million in 1911, Scotland sent over 500,000 men to the war, of whom over a quarter died in combat or from disease, and 150,000 were seriously wounded. Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig was Britain's commander on the Western Front. The war saw the emergence of a radical movement called Red Clydeside led by militant trades unionists. Formerly a liberal stronghold, the industrial districts switched to Labour by 1922 with a base among the Irish Catholic working-class districts. Women were especially active in building neighbourhood solidarity on housing issues. The Reds operated within the Labour Party with little influence in Parliament, and the mood changed to passive despair by the late 1920s. During the Second World War, Scotland was targeted by Nazi Germany largely due to its factories, shipyards, and coal mines. Cities such as Glasgow and Edinburgh were targeted by German bombers, as were smaller towns mostly located in the central belt of the country. Perhaps the most significant air raid in Scotland was the Clydebank Blitz of March 1941, which intended to destroy naval shipbuilding in the area. 528 people were killed and 4,000 homes totally destroyed. Perhaps Scotland's most unusual wartime episode occurred in 1941 when Rudolf Hess flew to Renfrewshire, possibly intending to broker a peace deal through the Duke of Hamilton. Before his departure from Germany, Hess had given his adjutant, Karl-Heinz Pinch, a letter addressed to Adolf Hitler that detailed his intentions to open peace negotiations with the British. Pinch delivered the letter to Hitler at the Berghof around noon on the 11th of May. Albert Speer later said Hitler described Hess's departure as one of the worst personal blows of his life, as he considered it a personal betrayal. Hitler worried that his allies, Italy and Japan, would perceive Hess's act as an attempt by Hitler to secretly open peace negotiations with the British. After 1945, Scotland's economic situation worsened due to overseas competition, inefficient industry and industrial disputes. Only in recent decades has the country enjoyed something of a cultural and economic renaissance. Economic factors contributing to this recovery included a resurgent financial services industry, electronics manufacturing, and the North Sea oil and gas industry. The introduction in 1989 by Margaret Thatcher's government of the community charge, widely known as the poll tax, 1 year before the rest of Great Britain, contributed to a growing movement for Scottish control over domestic affairs. On the 21st of December, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 exploded mid-air over the town of Lockerbie, killing all on board as well as 11 Lockerbie residents. It remains the deadliest terrorist attack in the United Kingdom. Following a referendum on devolution proposals in 1997, the Scotland Act 1998 was passed by the British Parliament, which established a devolved Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government with responsibility for most laws specific to Scotland. The Scottish Parliament was reconvened in Edinburgh on the 4th of July, 1999. The first to hold the office of First Minister of Scotland was Donald Dewar, who served until his sudden death in 2000. The Scottish Parliament building at Holyrood opened in October 2004 after lengthy construction delays and running over budget. The Scottish Parliament's form of proportional representation, the additional member system, resulted in no one party having an overall majority for the first 3 Scottish Parliament elections. The pro-independent Scottish National Party led by Alex Salmond achieved an overall majority in the 2011 election, winning 69 of the 129 seats available. The success of the SNP in achieving a majority in the Scottish Parliament paved the way for the September 2014 referendum on Scottish independence. The majority voted against the proposition, with 55% voting no to independence. More powers, particularly concerning taxation, were devolved to the Scottish Parliament after the referendum, following cross-party talks in the Smith Commission. Since the 2014 referendum, events such as the UK leaving the European Union, despite a majority of voters in Scotland voting to remain a member, have led to calls for a second independence referendum. In 2022, the Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain argued the case for the Scottish Government to hold another referendum on the issue, with the Supreme Court later ruling against the argument. Following the Supreme Court decision, the Scottish Government stated that it wished to make amendments to the Scotland Act 1998 that would allow a referendum to be held in 2023.